Welcome back to another episode or lesson in Finding Freedom. So, in this lesson, and we're probably going to do this into a couple series and break it up a little bit, but we're going to talk about taxes because, well, one, they're difficult to understand. Two, most people don't understand what they're doing when it comes to taxes, so they rather be an employee instead of treating themselves like a business. But what does it mean when you should pay yourself first? And who said it, right? Because some people would say Warren Buffett stated that you should pay yourself first in business. And if you treat yourself like one, even if you're an employee, there's certain things within the tax law and code that people should know in order to, well, live like business people, entrepreneurs, etc. Yes or yes, right? That would make things not only fair, but, well, if you could pay less taxes, then you could afford the tariffs, the interest, and inflation that comes along with everything else. Could you not? So let's get into it. How do taxes work and what are they? Taxes are, well, let's say, another form of payment to make sure that the system works correctly. Now, what do I mean the system? Well, you have law enforcement, you have military, you have first responders, etc. You have, well, the people that work for the hospital, ambulances, right? But do taxes pay for that? You know, you have to see, is it a private hospital or a public hospital, right? And those things matter because public hospitals, taxes pay for. Private hospitals do not get paid for by taxes. They look for investments or scenarios in which they can take advantage of individuals either by falsifying statements or whatever, and those that are colluding, like doctors who push prescription pills when they could just offer you the generic brand, so on and so forth, because they did their research and know, well, what's good for you or not. And I know some of you can see the mirror reflection in my glasses. Obviously, I have an outline here, but that's only because I want to keep this in a certain order. The last time my mother saw this, she's like, oh, I can see the reflection, you're cheating, blah, 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 blah. As though I got notes from somewhere else and it didn't come off the dome. But then again, she works from home and gets to do everything she wants, right? But then why is she always crapping on other people? What happens to bullies, right? Not to say that she's a bully, but I mean, if you're on salary and you're on someone's dime, how do you have the time to do that, edit pictures, run a business, etc., still do other stuff, yada, yada, and then when your son or somebody else does it, call them out and be excited for it? It's so weird, right? So let's continue with taxes because I know there's some good people out there that need to hear this and understand it, yes? What is a revenue and expense statement, right? Well, it's one of the pieces of paperwork in business that you need to submit to a bank in order to, well, acquire a loan. They want to know your revenue. They want to know your expenses, right? Similarly to, well, taxes, right? They want to know how much you're bringing in. That's your revenue. Your expenses, well, that's how much you spend on things like, well, salary, employees, etc. And then, of course, you have cost of goods sold, cost of doing business, blah, blah, blah. But then you also have a profit loss statement. Now, the profit is what comes after expenses have been deducted from revenue. And if revenue and expenses pretty much balance out to zero, you could run your business like a nonprofit or not-for-profit and still keep it private. But if you still make a profit, then you're going to have to show that on your profit loss statement. What is a loss? Well, if you run a credit card company like MasterCard, Visa, etc., well, if people don't pay on their loans or their credit, so on and so forth, or their debt, well, then you have to write that off as a loss, right? Because you did not receive payment. This would be your accounts receivable and your accounts payable department, and your controller would oversee that, report that to the CFO, whatever, amongst the board of directors. Now, what is profit? Well, that's the thing that you catch, right? That's why they say, what's your net, right? So if I were to put something through a filtering system and there was a net, think Barnum and Bailey Circus or Circus Olay, right? If someone were to fall, there's a net to catch them, right? So you have your revenue, your expenses, and then after your expenses get deducted, what falls through and gets caught by you is the profit, the net profit. profit, which would go into your pocket, your business, or to, well, assist growth, etc., or make investments with, or hand out bonuses with, whatever, right? This is why being performance based in certain industries is beneficial, because it goes to the bottom line. And most people don't understand that. They think you could just look something up on ChatGPT and, oh yeah, this, that, and the third, I know this already. Well, listen to understand instead of listening to respond. Most people are very quick with the tongue and slow to think, right? So, or vice versa, depending on who they are, all right? Now, Google has a number of ways that they make money, whether that's data, allowing people to, have their data sold. And this goes within the terms of service, right? So even if they don't have certain things, they have a large budget. How? Well, because they're selling information, and information is the most valuable form of currency. Now, if you know a company is going to do well on a stock market, couldn't you invest, on that stock market? Well, yeah. How would you do it? Would you invest in the stock? Would you buy option contracts? Would you buy a call? Would you buy a covered call? Would you buy a put? Would you buy a stay? Would you bet against the stock? So on and so forth. Would you set up an iron condor? I mean, these are all different terminologies and strategies, but if you don't understand the jargon, right, then you might get lost in the sauce, right? So, how is this taxed? Well, it's taxed as an individual entity through the Alphabet company or whatever it's floating as on the stock market, or whatever company is selling that data. So think about it like this. There's a holding company, kind of like an umbrella corporation, right? And then underneath that, if you ever look at an umbrella, there's little points at each end. And each one of those points can literally be a business or company or entity, right? Like an LLC, a C Corp, an S Corp, blah, blah, blah. Now, when you have a sole proprietorship, it does get taxed differently due to Sarbanes-Oxley, if I'm enunciating or pronunciating that correctly. That came out after 2001. These are different tax codes and laws that got updated, so on and so forth, that people have to follow within the business. If you're an accountant or CFO or controller or in the financial space, then you understand the terminology. Right? So if they were to sell other pieces of information, so on and so forth, well, they still got to pay taxes unless they know about allocation and other things, right? Because the cash flow is exactly what they're following. And then, of course, the taxes that they're paying is something else, similar to Apple. Why was somebody collecting a salary of $1, so on and so forth, in comparison to people that got paid so much, right? And then you wonder how people pay less in taxes. So let's continue. Isn't it odd that others fear and expose who are able to work together? See, when somebody gets put on notice, right? If you ever seen that movie Red Notice or whatever, or say Noted, etc., you would understand that when people fear something or someone, then you can also see how other people or individuals or species alike will actually show their true colors, their nature, and actually work together to prevent that thing that they fear from, well, either being successful, living their life, being happy, etc., in order to maintain the status quo that they already have. And that is just another form of psychology, which will fall underneath exposure therapy, right? So let's say somebody is really interested in something or under surveillance. Well, if they keep finding ways to hide, well, then the people that are following them are just going to point themselves out. Because remember, your cell phone is always connected. That's why you use data. Remember, I mentioned Google selling data. And what is data also connected to? An IP address, like a phone number. So think about that for a second, right? Now, moving forward, why would you want to run yourself as either USB or a business, right? So information that goes on a USB is similar to, well, paperwork that you would bring to the bank or whatever the case, unless it's printed on paper. Or you can run yourself like a business, right? So what is allocating funds, right? Well, if you set up an allocation, it literally comes out of your gross payment, which is what people look at in real estate when you're going to apply for an apartment complex, right? Or something of the sort. And then after that, you have, well, taxes that come out of what's left over, just like in business, because it's backwards in business. Remember that there's debits and credits, but they mean different things. And then, of course, the net is what they don't look at, right? They only go based off of gross. Well, if my gross is this, but you have allocations, so my gross isn't that, it's similar to, well, a judge, right? If you have child support garnishing your paycheck in order to take care of those that you decided to take care of in this world, or decided to mess around and find out, and then bam, there's a baby. Now somebody's got to take care of it, right? And then if you don't want to have extreme accountability and responsibility, somebody else will raise your child for you. However, if they do things accordingly and correctly, they can also get tax breaks, right? Not tax breaks based upon how many children they have or that they're taking care of, but if they set up the allocation, just like a garnishment of payments, right? That comes out of gross. So your gross isn't even that, is it not? And I don't care what people will say. Oh, well, your gross is what you're initially making. Okay, well, then what are your initials, right? What's an initialism if you can't see it, right? Is of, the, so on and so forth, since you want to play the game of communication in English with jargon. So if you set up allocations, that comes out of your gross, which would reduce the amount that you get taxed. Yes or yes. And any accountant would tell you this. Now, you can go to the library yourself or look this up online, but I'm pretty sure you'll find the same information. So let's move forward. Why would one set themselves up as a business? As I said, remember, Jay-Z says, because you are a businessman, not just a businessman, right? And if you look at certain things, right, well, how does a business run? Well, you can only get taxed on what's left over because you have expenses, right? You have salary, you have COGS, you have the cost of doing business, etc., right? The cost of goods sold, and they always say we're all a cog in a wheel or machine, right? Well, what's COGS? Cost of things sold, or the cost of doing business. And if you don't understand what that means, then you should probably educate yourself. However, this is a loose class because this is only one-on-one or 101, right? Me and you and whoever else is watching. And if you got any value out of this, smash that like button. Don't forget to follow me, because I'm not doing this for the dollars, but I am helping you put more dollars in your pocket, pay less in taxes, and to push back against tariffs because of the heavy burden that is going on, because, well, the place in which you reside is also in debt looking for money, right? And so they created tariffs. Well, tariffs also affect cost of goods sold because you still have shipping and logistics that you have to pay for, and that crap's expensive. If you don't believe me, ask anybody that owns a logistics company, right? So think about it. Now that you have this information, now you can use the library or the internet to get a clue, could you not? Could you not ask somebody who's knowledgeable, maybe pay them for some advice, consulting, hit like or something, or share a video that not only benefits you, but then puts them out into the world so that they too can go ahead and help more people, right? I mean, hell, even if I turned ads off and the AdSense off on my YouTube channel, I wouldn't be making money from that. But the information that is always constantly being sold, other word would be data, right? Information and data are different. One's processed, the other one is raw, right? I wonder how you make a baby. No pun intended. So why would life be important, right? Well, if you bring life into the world, you have to take care of it, right? It's like getting a pet, right? If you get a dog, a cat, a goldfish, whatever the case may be, a pet snake, whatever, right? You're going to have to take care of it. You're going to have to feed it, and those are all expenses. So I'll leave you with this: certain things that you can set up as an allocation of funds. Now, most people who are new to finance will understand how to finagle stuff because they're always trying to play in the gray. And sometimes that takes phalanges. I got that from the TV show Bones, who worked with Booth and a couple other people like Brennan or whatever, or Bones was Brennan, one of those. Anyways, but you would understand finagling, right? And finagling is just when somebody's trying to, make the numbers look a certain way so they could get by with stuff instead of finding a better way to make a living, right? So, why is life important? Well, if you don't think you're important, you think you're going to be entrusted with life, and why should you? If you're going to treat it like crap, right? Oh, well, this, that, and the third. Well, there's a TV show that I constantly quote called Hustle, right? And in one of them, he says that's weird because all these things only affect the people in the middle and lower class. They never affect those that are rich. He never said wealthy. See, wealth and health go together. Rich, snitch, itch, twitch, all these other things like a pitch, etc., all rhyme, and I wonder why. So even if you have $1 million in your savings, yeah, you may call yourself a millionaire, but that's going to run out, right? And some of you may say, oh, this bitch doesn't know what he's saying. But ask yourself this: would you rather be rich or wealthy and help others become healthy? The clue's in the title of health care, right? But most people don't understand that, right? So, till the next episode of Finding Freedom, I hope you guys take this and put it to use in your own life, so on and so forth. Go ahead and use the internet. Go to a library. Find somebody that knows something about finances, etc., not just life insurance, where you could do universal index banking or whatever it's called, where you become a self-bank. But if you want to play within the rules and not get too complex, well, here's a way to do it. So, till part 2, I will see you guys in the next lesson/episode. Peace.